Dancing high above the earth, I am calling to you. I am calling. Away, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, away, way, oh, way, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, way, oh. I'm a ghost in this land. I am dancing all around you. I am calling to you. Don't forget me. Away, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, away, way, oh, way, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, way, oh. We are ghosts in this land. We are dancing all around you. We are calling to you. We are your history. Away, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, away, way, oh, way, hey, way, hey. Away, hey, way, oh. Way, 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 hey, way, oh.
I need to tell you a little story. 14 years or 15 years ago, I had been a young PhD graduate and got offered a job right out of school by Monsanto. And so I traveled. It was the first time I'd ever traveled business class anywhere. And they had more cutlery than I know what to do with at dinner. At any rate, I signed on the dotted line and called home to Peterborough to tell Alan Linda Slavin, who many of you would know, that I had proudly acquired myself a job. At which point, Linda said, "Oh my God, you've signed your soul to the devil." And I really had no clue who Monsanto was. So Linda said, because I was a chemist and physics student at Trent, and Linda said, "You need to read about Vandana Shiva's work." This is 15 years ago. The outcome of that was that I called Monsanto and said, "No, thank you. I don't want to work for you. You're bad." Shortly thereafter, I had triplets. Me and my wife had triplets. And our firstborn was named Vandana, after Vandana Shiva. So I would like to ask Vandana, who is now 14, to introduce Dr. Shiva today.
Hi. So I'm kind of nervous, so I wrote out what I was going to say, so I apologize if I'm reading off of this. So today, I've been given the great privilege of introducing an immensely influential woman, environmentalist, and author. Truthfully, she doesn't require much of an introduction, as most of you here are surely familiar with the impact she's had on the world of science, environmentalism, and feminism. Even so, I'll just provide you with some biographical information. Vandana Shiva was born and raised in Dehradun, India, a city high in the Himalayan mountains. She developed a deep appreciation for nature at an early age. Growing up, she aspired to be a scientist. Leaving India for post-secondary education, Shiva attended the University of Guelph, pursuing an MA in philosophy after getting her BA in physics, and then the University of Western Ontario, earning her PhD in quantum theory physics. Vandana Shiva was fascinated with the collaboration that the world of science has with the social movements concerned with the environment. Working on this multidisciplinary effort, Shiva founded RFSTE, the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology. RFSTE concentrates on maintaining biodiversity and preserving individual rights against economic liberalization. Shiva also founded Navdanya, an organization to ensure the protection and support of native seeds. Navdanya translates into 9 seeds, representing the conservation of biodiversity and cultural diversity. This organization has accomplished wonders towards its goal, training over 500,000 farmers in food and seed sovereignty and sustainable agriculture, setting up over 111 community food banks across India, and helping set up the largest direct marketing, fair trade, organic network in India. They also established a learning center in North India. In addition to using science for the benefit of the environment and agriculture, Vandana Shiva is a firm supporter of gender equality and believes that women can and should play an integral and influential role in sustainable agriculture and the environment. Shiva has been deemed an eco-feminist because of this. The work Vandana Shiva does means a great deal to many young people in my generation. I feel an especially strong connection to Dr. Shiva, being named after her. Long before I was born, my parents were fans of Vandana Shiva and chose to name me after her. I'm so proud every time I explain why I was given my name. I usually start off very excitedly with, yeah, she's this really amazing, aggressive environmentalist. Because every time I listen to one of her speeches or discussions, I'm just blown away at her unbreakable conviction and passion. Her intensity is just one thing my peers and I admire. Her goal of bettering the environment through the use of science and technology is one that many of us share. The state of the world my generation inherits will be better if people like Vandana Shiva are successful in their mission to preserve the planet's biodiversity and social justice. This gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce to you Vandana Shiva.
I'm so glad that I have this opportunity to come and visit such a vibrant center for Indigenous knowledge. We need centers like this everywhere, because we've been ruled for a little over 500 years with knowledge that wasn't really knowledge. You know, knowledge means to know. The reason we are all called Indians is Columbus didn't know where he was going, landed on the wrong continent. He was coming for the spices in my country and our textiles, and landed here and announced native First Nations Indians. I'm so happy that there are Indians all over the world, of course. And we all became Indians. The rest of the world needs to become Indians now. So the people who lost their way decided to call the land on which they came, the Americas, Australia, they called it the empty land, and evolved a whole jurisprudence called terra nullius, the earth is empty. And it involved first not seeing how abundant the earth was and not seeing that there were people, because it was very convenient to define people into fauna and flora. In fact, the Encyclopedia Britannica till recently used to say the Aboriginal people of Australia are more like the fauna and flora than human beings. Now, at one level, the fact that we are part of the fauna and flora is a correct instruction, except that you don't leave some humans out of it. All of us are part of the earth community. All of us are members of the web of life. There are no masters, and the ones who think they are for a short while have lost their way. So terra nullius, about 30 years ago, was added with another emptiness. I call it bio nullius. Life is empty till toxic genes can be shot into cells of plants, and that's genetic engineering. In 1987, I was invited to a meeting in Geneva and a little town outside called Beaugève. And this was to understand the implications of the new biotechnologies. The conference was called Laws of Life. And at that time, the genetic engineering that was being planned was called the life sciences industry. Now, I'd done a major study in India on agriculture in Punjab, because this style of agriculture with chemicals was called the Green Revolution. It was not green, it was not revolutionary, and it was given a Nobel Peace Prize, but in '84 we had extreme violence. Same year we had a leak from a pesticide plant in Bhopal. It's 30 years. And I decided to study agriculture, even though it wasn't my field. You know, the only thing I'd studied was how quanta behave, and quantum don't behave like immutable balls that are separate from each other. Quanta tell us the world is related, that we live in a world of non-separability. Even more, that we don't live in a world of fixed determinateness. We live in a world of potential, of unfolding, of relationship in unfolding. So when I turned to agriculture, I really began from scratch. I'd played around with my mother on her farm, but it was an understanding what was taught to people in agriculture schools, and I couldn't believe what they're taught. You know, when I say it's not knowledge, I mean it. How can it be knowledge of the web of life when all you do is bring a poison spray and spray a pesticide? That's not knowledge of how insects work with each other. It's ignorance of the fact that among those insects are pollinators, 75% of which are gone. That among those insects are friendly insects, which do the work of controlling the pests if only we allow them to live. The ladybird beetle, the spiders. The spiders are first to go when you spray. And the health of a farm is totally measurable in terms of how many spiders are there. In England, they're doing a genetic engineering experiment with wheat. It's a strange experiment because they have put what they call cow-like genes, and every time I've tried to say, okay, what's the cow-likeness about? Did it come from a cow or did it not come from a cow? And they don't tell you. Now, if you have to be so secretive about knowledge, something's wrong, because knowledge is about sharing. Just like seeds are for sharing, knowledge is for sharing. And every time you have to hold it back, something funny is going on. When the Bhopal disaster happened, Union Carbide, which is now owned by Dow Chemicals, was asked by India, can you tell us what is the gas that leaked so we can take the antidote? We can prevent the blindness that's hitting people. Union Carbide said, sorry, we can't tell you, it's a trade secret. They let people die. Well, this experiment in England, which they're holding back in terms of knowledge, is to control aphids in wheat plants. But if you have ladybird beetles, they control the aphids for you. You don't need to do genetic engineering. And you'll have ladybirds if you don't spray poisons. So the solution is very simple: get rid of the poisons. Why are they in agriculture in the first place? They're in agriculture because some companies that got used to making chemicals for war couldn't end the habit after the wars were over. They got used to the profits. And they continued to push the chemicals for war as chemicals for food. And the reason industrial agriculture is based on such an edifice of false claims and ignorance is because it is knowledge for killing. Began as knowledge for killing human beings, when it went on to kill insects, went on to kill greens. But all herbicides, their design is to kill greens. Agent Orange was a war chemical to spray on Vietnam. Children in Vietnam are still being born crippled. The veterans who sprayed the Agent Orange are still having problems. Chemical fertilizers. The explosive factories were retooled to make chemical fertilizers. And chemical fertilizers can once again make bombs and explosives. Every major bombing of recent times has been a fertilizer bomb. All of the bombing in Afghanistan. And this was told to me by a US security person. He said, oh my God, I hadn't realized this, that these chemicals came from the war and can go back to make explosives. Because when they were fighting the Soviets, they poured fertilizers as aid. And now all villages have raw material to make the bombs. The Oklahoma bombing, the Oslo bombing, the Delhi High Court bombing, all of them, all you do is buy bags of fertilizer, turn it into an explosive. Pesticides, the early pesticides were made, especially of the organophosphate family, they were made for the concentration camps. And the group of companies, they formed a cartel, which became known as IG Farben. And IG Farben was then, after the war, tried for war crimes. The Nuremberg trials were all around the scientists who made those chemicals and the companies. Some very, very good books on this. One is called Hell's Cartel. And the sad thing is, all this should have been put to an end in 1945, and it's continued for another half century because these corporations got into the habit of lying. And they got into the habit of influencing government decisions. No wonder they cause harm. So in the 80s, they realized that they weren't making enough money through the chemicals. They weren't going to put their chemicals away, but they realized that marrying the chemicals to the seed would be both a very, very efficient way of control, as well as a very big source of profits. And when universities had evolved the tools of recombinant DNA to move genes across species, the university scientists said, we won't take this further because we don't know what we're doing. We don't know the ethical, ecological, health implications of genetic engineering. We have the capacity, but we put a self-imposed moratorium. The Asilomar Convention was where the scientists who had evolved these tools said, we don't know, so we won't go further. Which it's basically called the precautionary principle in environmental science. If you don't know enough, then you should err on the side of caution. But the companies got hold of these tools, even took patents on them, and then started to rush to commercialize genetically engineered crops. So at this meeting in 1987, they're laying out their plan. They're saying, we've got to do genetic engineering because it's the only way we can take patents on seeds and patents on life. And that's the only way we can make our profits through royalty collection. And it's not good enough to do it in North America and Europe because the populations are small, The big populations are in the south, so we've got to have a global treaty. And the treaty became the Intellectual Property Rights Treaty of the World Trade Organization. A Monsanto representative in 1995, when the WTO became established, said, we've achieved something unprecedented. We wrote an agreement, took it to our government, and had it imposed on the rest of the world. We were the patient, diagnostician, physician all in one. And they were patients in their definition because farmers were saving seeds. That's what was making Monsanto sick. And their solution was, now onwards, it should be a crime for farmers to save seeds. Now, I've grown up in a culture where seed saving is a duty. I spent 40 years working in defense of the earth and service of the earth. So as soon as I heard the companies talk about owning life through patents and taking patents through genetic engineering, which in effect means that if you want to say it very simply, GMO, which is how genetically engineered organisms are talked about in abbreviation, you could say GMO means God move over. Because if Monsanto's the creator, then the creator must get displaced. That's the day I took a pledge to myself that I would save seeds the rest of my life. And over these many years, every farmer who joins the movement takes a very simple pledge. We have received these seeds from nature and our ancestors. We owe it to future generations to hand them over with their full diversity and their full integrity. We will therefore not respect any law that undermines our higher law of protecting biodiversity for the future. And we will not adopt any technology that destroys our food and our seed. And that is the very simple basis of seed sovereignty. Seed sovereignty is not just the sovereignty of the community that uses seed and grows food. Seed sovereignty is the sovereignty of the seed to evolve. In all traditional cultures, life in diversity is the community. Humans are not the only community. Anthropocentrism is such a recent error. And it's anthropocentrism that, of a particular kind, that allowed the birth of terra nullius, bio nullius, because once you make one species a privileged species, then you get into the habit of making the privileged of that species the only ones who count. And the women disappear, and the First Nations disappear, and the working people disappear, the farmers disappear. And so much of the edifice of economics and science has reinforced these structures. We are made to believe that the science that was constructed with a lot of violence through the Bacons and the Newtons and the Descartes of the world is the only knowledge that counts. But what did Bacon say? Bacon said, you cannot know nature without raping her and torturing her. That her secrets are revealed through force. Anyone who has worked on the land, anyone who has been a steward of seed, knows that secrets get revealed with the deepest love and the deepest compassion. Everyone who has brought up children. And Boyle went so far as to say that the idea that native people have of reverence for nature is coming on in the way of our empire. He said it very clearly. And therefore the sacred had to be destroyed to establish the empire. And the beautiful thing is, you know, the song that we heard now or in the earlier part or any ceremony of the First Nations is such resilience because it shows that the sacred can never be extinguished. And this very artificial idea of a nature separate from us, which we can subjugate and violate, was associated with the idea of nature as dead matter, just collections of things that you can exploit. And then from there, you got this very artificial separation of science and the sacred. In my view, the science of interdependence, which is the only science that can guide us on how to live on this planet, that science is a science of the sacred. This morning, while I was doing an interview in the car, a question was raised about, rational science versus the sacred. I said, how can a science be rational if it is blind to the interconnections of the world? How can a science be rational if it cannot see that there's a connection between the soil and the plants and our health? How can a science be rational if it is denying the fact that 70% of the food we eat comes from small farms and only 30% comes from industrial farms? Only 10% of the corn and soya that's genetically modified is feeding people. The rest is going for biofuel and animal feed. It's not very rational to develop a food system that doesn't bring food to people. It's not very rational to devastate the planet to provide food at 30%. 75% of all planetary destruction is based on activities related to industrial globalized agriculture. That includes the destruction of biodiversity, because a globalized system cannot tolerate biodiversity, cannot tolerate diversity of any kind, cultural or biological. So it must promote monocultures. It can only work through monocultures. It can only shrink our food base from the 8,500 plant species people have eaten around the world to 8 commodities that are grown. And those 8 commodities, as monocultures, have driven off about, I would say now, 90% of the plants we used to eat, according to the FAO in 1995, 20 years ago. 75% of the plant diversity had gone because of industrial monocultures. And industrial monocultures, again, are based on ignorance. They're based on ignorance of A, how plants work together. I've just been gifted by Diane on my way over beautiful seeds of the 3 sisters. Agriculture that doesn't see how beans can provide fertilizers, how the squash gives you supplementary nutrients, is a blind agriculture. And having created that kind of blindness, they've created real blindness by spraying everything out, by defining plants that would feed us as weeds. We have done so many studies to look at the biodiversity output of small farms, because that's the kind of farming we promote through Navdanya. And I could run through case study after case study, but on the average, if the same amount of agricultural land that is cultivated today for agriculture was put under biodiverse ecological agriculture, we would be providing enough nutrients for 2 Indias. And if done on a world scale, we could grow 2 times the food we need. That's why this panic that's created by saying, no, we're going to be 10 million or 9 million, and how will we feed the world? We definitely will not feed the world through monocultures of toxic GMOs. We are feeding the world through small farms and gardens, and thank you for a wonderful breakfast. And every time, we had, this was our second breakfast. We had a good styrofoam breakfast. I mean, there's still places that use styrofoam. I couldn't believe it. It's, you know, it's, as they say, convenient. But it's only convenient if you stop before the throwaway. After the throwaway, there's a lot of inconvenience of polluted water, lots of inconvenience of dioxins, but we don't take the full sphere into account. And because we don't take the full sphere into account, it's so easy to define every problem that has been created by blindness, to repeat that blindness in acceleration, and do the opposite of what Einstein warned us. Einstein said, we cannot change things with using the same mindset that created the problem. Now, the two big applications of genetic engineering are Bt crops and herbicide-tolerant crops. Just two, in all these years. I debated, in 1985, I debated the vice president of World Bank, who had earlier been the head of Rockefeller in India and introduced the Green Revolution. I think David Hopper was his name. And later I was invited to go out to give a Hopper lecture, in spite of my debate with David Hopper. And we are sitting, and I'm talking about what the Green Revolution has done to India. Destroyed our soils, destroyed our water, created a cancer train that leaves Punjab, loaded with people who are getting cancer because of the chemicals. And I was talking about all the externalities. And Hopper says, we don't have to worry about any of that, because now we have genetic engineering. And with genetic engineering, we'll be able to grow food in the moon, in the Sahara, and on toxic dumps. Well, that hasn't happened. They were talking about doing everything through genetic engineering. All that has been achieved is 2 traits that are based on single gene toxic expression. Because everything else that's important to food comes from multi-genetic expression and cannot be manipulated through single gene transfer. It has to be the whole genome that we work with. Yield comes from multi-genetic trait. Resilience comes through multi-genetic trait. So all you have is Bt toxin, herbicide toxin. Now, one could say, okay, a little bit of a nasty is all right if we are solving a big problem. The big problem they were to solve with Bt is controlling pests. With HT was controlling weeds. And in these 20 years, where are we at? We are at pests we've never had before. And superweeds taking over the farms of the United States, and probably also taking over the farms of Canada, because it's in the nature of evolution to build resistance. And any technology that ignores that factor is a blind technology. Again, it's ignorance of evolution. And I was so glad that Pope Francis said, evolution is real. Evolution is real in human community, evolution is real in biological communities, evolution is real. And it's because evolution is real, we can adapt, we can change, we can evolve, as do pests, as do weeds. Now, having destroyed so much of the food basis by spraying poisons, they now want to go around saying we are the solution to hunger and malnutrition. Anyway, saying we will save the hungry. Now they're talking of malnutrition. I'll give you 2 examples. How, again, this is false claims. So normally, a good farm will have lots of greens, very often spontaneous. They just grow and are a gift of the earth. And my grandmother used to cook a wonderful batwa, which was in all the fields of Punjab, or the amaranths. There are 250 kinds of amaranth varieties in the fields of South India. This is available to everyone, till the herbicides start to wipe them out. So when you get vitamin A deficiency, there are 2 ways we go about it. Create the gardens that become sources of good vitamin A, or genetically engineer a rice. Now, the genetically engineered rice hasn't been doing too well. Since the year 2000, they've been trying. I wrote an essay when they first introduced it to say this is a blind approach to blindness prevention because you're not looking at everything that has much more vitamin A. We'd have had to eat 3 kilograms of rice to get the daily requirement, whereas you need to eat just 3 leaves of the coriander or a little bit of the moringa tree greens. So many people, so many children have lost their access to nutrition because of the monoculture blindness and industrial farming. And yet it's those of us who would bring all the bounties of the earth to food communities through a biodiverse farming system. We are being accused of killing 200 million children. The latest is a GMO banana. And this was very strange. Yeah? GMO banana with iron for India and vitamin A for Uganda. And you would think, why these two countries? We are not banana republics. But we are the two biggest producers and eaters of banana. That's why they're targeting us, because it's huge. We did calculations on the iron. Even if they increase iron content by 5 times, they'll be 7,000% less efficient than our turmeric, our curry leaves, our moringa, our tamarind. All of the foods that we eat have much higher levels of iron than they'll ever be able to put into the banana. The case of Uganda is worse, because the super banana, we've now tracked. I was invited to Indonesia because farmers had been arrested for saving seeds, and I went to give support. They served me yellow bananas in a village, remote village. They served me red and yellow bananas. I said, I'm sure there's iron in the red and vitamin A in the yellow. So can you track a little more on the biodiversity of bananas? Turns out that Dr. Dale, who's developing the GMO banana in Australia, pirated a Micronesian banana for the vitamin A. It is in the entire enterprise of genetic engineering to first try and own the seed through patents, and second, pirate. Because you can't invent all these traits. We have had to fight the case of neem, basmati, rice. I'm also building the movement for climate resilience, because a new claim is, we're having climate change and only the corporations can bring us climate resilient crops. Not true. Up here in the snow areas, everything that you've grown has to be climate resilience for the cold, for the frost. In India, coastal areas, the rices we've had are tolerant to salt. Gurpreet works with me, and we realized 20 years ago, which means we are 20 years older. But Gurpreet worked with me because I was doing, they were trying to introduce industrial aquaculture. And we knew there were rices that are intercropped with shrimp. And there's a whole system in Kerala called Chemmin Kettu. It literally means the field with rice and with shrimp. And when you measure the whole system of shrimp plus rice, they're very productive. But if you focus only on shrimp, you'll say not enough shrimp. You focus only on rice, you'll say not enough rice. The monoculture of the mind declares as unproductive, highly productive systems that are productive in the measure of diversity. So the salt-tolerant rices we've conserved in Orissa have been used after the super cyclone, have been used after the tsunami. Monsanto's claim to climate-resilient crops, and they put a patent application in India. It was thrown out by a patent office because we worked in India to put laws that say life and living processes and biological processes are not inventions. Should be the basis of any law anywhere. Now, you know the case of Percy Smizer, who was sued after Monsanto contaminated his crop. They're now suing an Australian farmer whose canola crop has been contaminated. But worse, they're suing communities and governments that evolve laws to say we won't have GMOs. This has happened recently in 2 regions in the United States. You might have heard of the GMO labeling initiatives in California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, which were killed with money, by just pouring money. 100 million has been poured for those 4 votes. In Vermont, the citizens mobilized, and Vermont is considered one of the poorest states of the United States. But because they have to do with very little, they have community. And they mobilized as community. And half of the people of Vermont participated to put pressure on their government to say, you've got to have a law. And the law was passed. And now they're being sued by the corporations, saying you can't have a law for labeling. And the arguments in the case, because I went for Solidarity Vermont on this trip, the argument for the case is, we are persons. Corporations are persons. They're not persons. They're pretending they're human beings. And citizens having a right to know what they're eating and making a choice on that basis, that right to know is taking away the freedom of speech of the corporation. So you can just see the rights of all beings are being trampled by this new cooked-up entity, which is not a being. It's a legal contract. It's a legal construct. And now they're saying we are the being, but we are the only beings, because that logic ends up. No human being has rights. No species has rights. Only corporations have rights. And if you take that thinking out into the next decade, there'll be no life on this planet. Just yesterday, I got a message because I went to help the Hawaii communities who are fighting GMOs, because the islands of Hawaii, because they're islands, have been chosen as seed production centers for all GMOs. The corn and soya produced there. Lots of spraying, lots of poisons, kids are getting cancer. So one island, Hawaii, got a council resolution passed to say, tell us what is in these sprays. That's all. They didn't say ban it, they said let us know. They were sued. Now, on the 4th of November, Maui voted to be GMO-free. They didn't ask for labeling, they voted, and went through. By the end of this year, they have to have a law. Monsanto and Dow are suing and saying, you can't ban. Now, can you imagine what world they want to create, where people who vote for their protection and protection of the earth, and governments who do that duty, can be sued by the criminal corporations who are doing harm to the earth and people? That the criminals are setting the laws. That is why we have to turn to the earth. That is why we have to turn to each other. Because when we realize that there are 5 corporations controlling seed, 5 corporations controlling food, 5 corporations controlling the conversion of food into junk and make money out of it, they should be punished. The Monsantos should be punished for polluting the seed through toxic genes. The Pepsis and Cokes, who call themselves the Grocery Manufacturers Associations, as if they bring us food, they should be punished for ruining our children's health. And a case had been brought in India against Coca-Cola. We've shut 3 plants of Coca-Cola. Women have shut it down. But a case was brought. And my colleague and friend, Prashant, was fighting this case. In the middle of the case, the lawyer of Coca-Cola puts up a sheaf of papers and said, you can't try us under the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act because there's a new law. Only Coca-Cola knew there's a new law because they wrote it. Just like Monsanto wrote the intellectual property laws. The food safety laws are written by those who destroy our health. So these 5s, that's it. They get bigger by the day. because they have managed to trample on every democratic institution, on every environmental law, and on every culture that allows us to protect the earth and our own lives and our own health and our own freedom. But when we realize they're just 15, and we are part of a web of life which is 300 million species, we are 7 billion people, that we are the majority. We are not the minority. They are the minority. And they are a criminal minority. And I don't hesitate using that term, because they are engaging in crimes against the earth and people. You just have to see the images of the children being born with the birth defects in Argentina as they spray Roundup from the skies for Roundup-ready crops. My heart goes to the 291,000 Indian farmers who committed suicide because they were pushed into debt because of these proprietary seeds and the chemicals and the pesticides. So we are many, and we need to now work not as individuals, but as a community of the majority. The second thing that I have learned over these many years is indigenous knowledge is not backward. It is far more sophisticated in terms of dealing with the challenges we face of ecological sustainability, health of people, and producing more by using less. And that's why I've started the Learning Center at the Navdanya farm, where we join indigenous knowledge with knowledge about how the soil works, because we didn't have microscopes earlier, now we do. And our studies don't just show that we can produce twice the food, but the beauty of it is we can produce more food by giving more to the earth. That's something the mechanistic mind cannot understand. It just cannot understand that by giving, you receive more. So you give more to the soil becomes fertile, the crops become abundant. You save your seeds, each seed multiplies into 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000. The family of crops that I absolutely love are called the millets. And millets are, we call them forgotten foods. The reason the 7 species of the jowar, ragi, bajra are called millets is because of the million. That each seed, tiny seed, gives you 1,000,000 seeds. Has the potential to give you 1,000,000 seeds. Now, where can you ever get that level of abundance in industrial agriculture? You can't, it's the opposite. The seed is generous, it says, I will give you a lot, eat a bit, share a bit, save a bit. Never ever have scarcity. The Monsantos of the world, no, we can't let her have a farmer save the seed. You're creating scarcity. You're creating seed famines. I have watched the seed famine grow in the cotton seed areas of India. They've created a famine. It's the same with food. Even the word food desert in the heart of wealth in America is so wrong. It's the food system that has created a desert by sucking out everything from the earth, everything from farmers, everything from communities, and then expecting money to decide where this will go. In our scriptures, food is sacred. And the giving and growing of good food is your highest duty, your highest sacred duty. And everything is food. The web of life is a food web. So the only way food will reach everyone is when we become participants in that web of life. Because there's no scarcity. There's abundance both through the way nature gives to us and abundance in the way economies of sharing and caring produce and create more. Another very simple lesson I've learned in all these years is that when we work on the lessons we've received from our cultures and our ancestors, that the seed is sacred, the land is sacred, the food is sacred, that we actually generate the power and energy to take on the fictitious giants who pretend they're human beings and are persons, who then have created another fiction to say, we are creators. We aren't just persons, but we are creators. We created life on earth. And all of life on earth is our invention. And everyone should be paying us royalties. Now, I do cases. I fought the biopiracy cases, and we've defeated them every time. But there's a limit to how many cases you can fight. There's also a new moment. Not only was there an attempt to bring GMO seeds under patenting, having realized that movements are growing everywhere on seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, there is now a new attempt to make local indigenous seeds illegal. They had hoped they'd drive out indigenous seeds. The opposite happened. Because of Monsanto, so many people started to say, I'm going to secure my seed supply. I'm going to make sure I know where my food comes from. And all of these movements that have grown in the last decade and a half, that same period when Suresh turned his back on Monsanto. And thank you for not being there, because I think Trent University has gained a lot by your presence here. The statement made in 1987 was, by the year 2000, all seed will be genetically engineered. And all farmers will be buying seed from us. Only 1% of the world's cropland is under GMOs. And the fastest growing area of every society, 25%, is organic farming. 25%. Now, they know if this is 25%, it'll take a few years, it'll all be organic. That's what they want to pretend. That's kind of the last turf. So their new attempt is to try and get local seeds banned. In the United States, they've just sent notices to seed libraries. And they're actually even arguing that having local seeds that your grandmothers had and their grandmothers had, their grandmothers had, that is agri-terrorism. It's a big threat. It's not a threat in terms of safety, because the grandmothers have tested it out. But it is a threat to the power of monopoly. And to deal with the power of monopoly, we learned from Gandhi the very beautiful idea of Satyagraha. Satya is truth, Agraha is force, the force of truth. Gandhi used Satyagraha in 1906 against the apartheid regime of South Africa. He used it against the compulsory cultivation of indigo, where farmers of India couldn't grow food, they had to grow indigo, and they were starving, and they had no clothes. Then he used it in 1930 when the British tried to establish a monopoly on salt. We need a lot of salt because we're a tropical climate. And the British thought, if we can prevent Indians from making salt and make salt making our monopoly, we'll collect so much more money to get more guns, more cannons to shoot them and control them better. And Gandhi just walked to the beach, picked up the salt from the sea and said, nature gives it for free. We need it for our survival. We will continue to make salt. We will not obey your laws. Of course, he was thrown into jail, but the salt laws could never be implemented. We've done the same on seed. When in 2004, the laws similar of what they're implementing in the US or they tried in Europe, they tried to bring it in India. And I traveled the length and breadth of the country and informed the farmers what was coming, and we had discussions and we had rallies, and I took 100,000 signatures to my Prime Minister from across the country. And the letter was very simple. The British tried to impose salt monopoly. We did a salt satyagraha. Monsanto is now trying to impose a seed monopoly. We are engaging in seed satyagraha. You can write all the laws you want. But our law comes from the earth and our ancestors, and we will continue to obey those higher laws because what is at stake is life itself. And I'm so glad all of you are involved in this beautiful movement that comes from the deepest love for the earth, the deepest love of our ancestors and the future, and the deepest courage that comes when everything is at stake. And it's not about a trivial little campaign. This is not a campaign. This is the ultimate movement. And I would like to end with an invitation to all of you, because you are, I really feel you are the center of the resurgence of the indigenous. And there was a very beautiful poem sent to me when I started saving seeds from Palestine. And it said, you can bomb our villages, you can destroy everything we have, you can take away our culture, you can destroy our books, you can kill every space for every insect and bird, so till there's no place to hide. But I do not fear, because I have saved one seed that I will sow and plant again. So let us make the next Earth Day, which is now called Mother Earth Day. It's called Mother Earth Day because of the Bolivians who worked on the rights of Mother Earth after the failure of Copenhagen and the entire climate treaty. And there's a lot of problems even now. There's no one sure that 2015 will give us a binding treaty. But this rights of Mother Earth then led to the United Nations saying, okay, we'll call the 22nd of April Mother Earth Day, not just Earth Day. Now, on Earth Day, it was enough to say, I'll consume green. I will switch off lights for 1 hour. And then go on living as usual. Mother Earth Day doesn't have those trivial 1 hour options. Mother Earth Day is the Mother Earth calling us and saying, get all the poisons out of your food. Get all the destructive power of corporations out of your lives. Create seed freedom, food freedom, and your own freedom with every day of your life. And that is in our hands. So I hope all of you, in your different ways, will start celebrating 22nd of April and going on to Mother's Day and all the grandmothers that were sung about. We run a grandmother's university at our learning center because I really do believe, one generation before us has a lot of wisdom that we can use for the future. And then we sow seeds, we give our thanks to the earth, and the more we grow the alternatives that are based on the laws of the earth, the more irrelevant the toxic corporations, their toxic chemicals, their toxic GMOs, their toxic actions of threatening democracy and freedom of people, the more irrelevant it'll become. They will go away because they will not matter in our lives, because we will have created freer lives based on the freedom of all species and the sacred. Thank you.
What a tsunami in a little frame. Her time is very limited, but we do have a little bit of time for discussion, which I'll try to moderate as best as I can. So without much more ad-libbing to this.
Dr. Shiva, you mentioned 2 traits only for the GMOs, and you talked a little bit about BT, and you mentioned HT. Would you say a few words about the Roundup Ready technology and how really it is a herbicide that is dangerous in our food?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the HT that was developed most, about 93%, is herbicide. The herbicide is Roundup, a proprietary herbicide of Monsanto. Now, the Roundup Ready crops basically kill everything else that's green. Earlier herbicides used to be what they call pre-emergence. They had to be sprayed on the grass before you sowed. By putting the gene for resistance to Roundup you can keep spraying, even as the plant is growing. Now, a herbicide-resistant, Roundup-ready system means the three sisters can't exist together. The beans will go, the squash will go. It also means that residues start to accumulate, both in the soil as well as in the plant. Now, the Monsantos have constantly denied that these accumulations happen. They keep saying it degrades, it breaks down. It's not breaking down. Studies that are showing that the soil is losing its beneficial organisms. When we did the study on BT, it's the same. So when beneficial organisms go, then pathogenic organisms come in. And as pathogenic organisms come in, new problems are being created, and especially in Iowa, they have done studies that the corn, that is herbicide-resistant corn, when fed to animals, now has a fungus that is leading to stillbirths and abortions in animals. And all this was tracked because farmers were losing so many animals. The second thing that's been found is there's a buildup of glyphosate in the corn itself. And an independent study was done recently, and there are follow-up studies being done on it. Let me just give you the data. So GM corn, which is Roundup resistant, has 13 parts per million of glyphosate residue. And we're eating it. The non-GMO has 0, of course. It wasn't sprayed with herbicide. But the more dangerous, that is really puzzling scientists, is the buildup of formaldehyde. 200 parts per million. And everyone is saying it's because the metabolic pathways have been so disrupted that the breakdown of formaldehyde is not happening anymore. It's building up. And when we used to talk of biosafety and got the international biosafety laws in place in the United Nations, is because we said we don't know how it'll work, but it will destabilize the ability of organisms to self-organize and manage their metabolism through self-regulation. Self-regulation, quite clearly, is breaking down. Now, while the harmful chemicals are growing, the beneficial minerals are disappearing. Calcium has dropped from 6,000 to 14. Magnesium, 113 to 2. Manganese, 14 to 2. Now, other research that's happening is showing that the companies will say, this can't affect us because we don't have the pathways that the plants have. And therefore, because the plant is killed by glyphosate. But we are not just human cells. Most of our body is other species, other bacteria, other fungi, other viruses. And as this glyphosate starts to accumulate in our stomach, it kills the bacteria, which has the same pathway as the plants. And as the beneficial bacteria are killed, as well as glyphosate, the Roundup binds minerals. It's called chelation. As it binds the minerals, it removes those minerals from playing the role that they play in maintaining our body's health. And a lot of call for further investigation is there because scientists are saying one of the deficiencies that is disrupting the neurotransmitters is the deficiency in manganese. And manganese is heavily bound by glyphosate. So the beneficial bacteria are being killed, they are not doing their work. The minerals are being bound, they can't do their work. Soil is being killed in the same way as our gut is being killed. And talking of interconnectedness, I think the next generation of science is going to be the relationship of biodiversity in the soil, in our gut, and the functionings of our brain. That is the interconnectedness our elders knew without having to study the microbes.
Dr. Shiva, so much of what you talk about has to do with the disconnect between the marriage of modern science and a profit motive with traditional sources of knowledge and our inability to bridge those gaps and to truly understand what is happening. At Trent, there is a significant amount of discussion about this. So with your permission, I'd like to ask Dan Longboat, who's one of the bigger proponents of this train of thought at Trent, but also put Haroon Akram Lodi, another of our professors in international development at Trent, on notice, that we'd also like to hear from him about this. Because we'd like to also bring the international discussion that Dr. Shiva has introduced to us here, also to have a local pivot at Trent. So, Dan?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. And you shared so many really important and critical ideas and thoughts and really fundamental understandings that all of us should be engaged in. One of the fortunate opportunities that we have at Trent, and many of these students are, I guess, really the beneficiaries and the progenitors of the work that we do here, is around the interdisciplinarity discussions and the sharing of knowledge between specific disciplines within the academy. What we're actually promoting in many different disciplines, Suresh as an example of that, Indigenous studies, and in particular Indigenous environmental studies, we're actually promoting the dialogue of the cross-cultural sharing of knowledge. Can you speak a little bit and share your ideas that go well beyond the interdisciplinarity and speak to this idea of cultural knowledge sharing and the necessity of that? Thank you.
Well, yeah, interdisciplinarity is still bound by the narrowness of the mechanistic fragmented disciplines that were born in the last few hundred years. The cross-cultural takes us down a path where we are able to see unity in diversity. Because if, whether it's the ceremonies that I used here or in India, and I was in the Andes, in Peru and Ecuador, it's exactly the same ceremonies. They do a havan like we do a havan, and have a fire sacrifice. When you offer, you do, I think you call it smudging. When you do the smudging and then you take the blessings, we do exactly the same with our arti. Now, I think the basic learnings across the world of the fundamental issues that have been practiced in some diversity but have an underlying unity is really the cross-cultural learning we need. Because what we've had is an imposition of uniformity, and the uniformity of the conqueror. And that uniformity is then violating all of the diversity, both cultural and biological. And it's creating divisions. And I would say, because you also from international affairs, my book on the Punjab was an attempt to understand why were these protests growing? Why was there so much violence? And I realized it was because of the way the agriculture model was being experienced as a model of slavery and was creating all these new costs of soil degradation, water, etc. And if you look at what's happening in Syria right now, people don't connect it to a model of agriculture and model of vulnerability, but these carbon conversations that we are part of. 2009, Syria had a very, very severe drought, so severe that in 1 year, 800,000 people were uprooted from agriculture. 75% of the crops were destroyed, 85% of the livestock. Now, that kind of movement of people, you can only respond in two ways. Either you say, we're going to let you have seed sovereignty, we're going to help you create a climate-resilient agriculture, here's the work, here are the seeds, we'll get it from wherever, and you become resilient. What did Assad do? He threw them into jail. And as he threw them into jail, their relatives got armed. And as they got armed, the West thought, good opportunity to have regime change in Syria, as we did in Iraq, as we did in other places, arm the rebels. They arm the rebels, before you know it, you've got an ISIS. And now, I see from the newspapers that I read, Canada is in a tizzy over this thing called ISIS, whose original reference used to be the goddess of the earth in Egypt. Isis was the earth goddess of Egypt. So we've created, through failure to recognize the common roots of problems, we have imposed a uniform solution of a militarized response, creating more militarized response and terrorism in the process. And I think all cross-cultural learning in these situations, whether it's how we grow food and protect biodiversity, or how we create peace, peace with the earth and peace with community, I think those are places which can contribute in a very, very big way to contemporary thinking. In fact, I'm going to leave my book for your library, Making Peace with the Earth. Dan.
Wonderful. Perhaps I can get Haroon to jump in here. And also, before some giving notice to people, Dr. Jonathan Bordeaux is here. And Jonathan studies significantly over the past 5 or 10 years the importance of place. And I think that central to all of these discussions is how place functions in knowledge integration, and how can it be a barrier sometimes as well in knowledge integration. So I'm putting Jonathan on notice that we'd like to hear from him. But Haroon?
Well, Dr. Shiva, thank you very much for a very inspiring presentation. I'm sure I speak for everybody that we really learned a lot from it, and we'll leave here, I think, inspired to go out and change not only our practice, but our day-to-day relations with both ourselves and with the earth. I think many people in this room have very different identities. Some people are activists, some people are growers, many people are just consumers. I think from the standpoint of people in the room, one of the central questions is, how do we bring people together? How do we build a movement which takes people of very disparate backgrounds? You know, food growers, food consumers, indigenous people. How do we build a movement of commonality that can actually challenge a corporate food system which can't feed the world?
Well, I think the first false identity that needs to be given up is the identity of consumers. You know, the word consumption used to be used in the Middle Ages for TB. People died of consumption. Now, while everyone might not be a grower, but everyone can participate in shaping a system of growing. And we use the term co-producer. That farmers, first, we don't only restrict to production, because agriculture is first about the care for the earth. I really do believe food is a byproduct of care for the earth. You do the right things for the earth, you'll get food. Good farmers are protectors of the earth, of the biodiversity, of the seed, of the soil, of the water. And as all our research is showing, and you know it because of the kind of work you do, while industrial agriculture with globalized trade is 40% of the emissions of greenhouse gases, with returning carbon to the soil and creating more fertile soils, and creating more resilient soils which have more water, therefore can deal with drought, which have all the ability to deal with climate change in a better way, that ecological agriculture and small gardens are the single biggest solution to that problem. So if farmers are all of this, and also health provisioning, after all, healthy food gives us health. But we think of health providers as the pharmaceutical industry. The real health providers are growers of good food and cookers of good food. So what we need to do is really think of ourselves as citizens of the earth, and food is the currency of the earth community. Food and energy. Food is energy. And if food is energy, then our conscious decisions to reach out to good farmers and say, I'll take care of my health by making sure you are able to grow the food you need to grow. And creating these links, but also not just as individual to individual. After all, we have institutions. You are working on an institutional shift at this university. And bit by bit, shifting the system as a whole. I think every school, every institution, every hospital. Isn't it sad that when you're ill, you get the worst food? And the poor nuns in England used to bake cookies for the people who were ill and bring it in on Sundays. It was banned in terms of being dangerous. But that dangerous food that's making you sick is fine. So I think that's how we make the link. The beauty about the food web is it's a web. And since it's a web, everyone can enter that web from wherever they are. If they're researchers, through knowledge about the web. If they're growers, through growing better food. They're eaters, by eating more consciously and eating with higher responsibility. And isn't it interesting that all the time in the past, we were made to believe that if you have to get something, you have to sacrifice something. And here with the food issue and the ecological issue, every time we do the right thing, there's only gain for everyone. For all species, for the soil, and for ourselves. And in addition, for me, the most very important thing is, it is the only way we will defend freedom. It's through food we will defend freedom, because it's through food we are being colonized.
We're effectively out of time, but I think we should hear from Jonathan, and then if I can ask Tamina to queue up for the thank you, because Dr. Shiva has a very narrow schedule today.
Well, I must say I've been really put on the spot. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for just how profoundly moving your discourse was. And it picked up right from the very beginning. Really the first work that I actually did at Trent University when I first came 25 years ago. And that really concerned terra nullius and the correlation between terra nullius and the symbolics of wilderness in northern North America. And my initial writing, in fact, was about that correlation between the legal document of emptiness and a symbolics of wilderness. And it wasn't that I was so interested in saying that one was identical with the other, because wilderness is a much deeper concept than that. But at the same time, it had come to be bound together. And somehow I had to sort out the way the symbolics were related to terra nullius. And it took me to go to Australia, as a matter of fact, because that became the piece of colonialism which most explicitly declared that doctrine was in fact the British in Australia. So you took me back on the one side to some of the most biggest thoughts that I had when I first began my career here, which took me into reflection on landscape and place. And I come to this gathering today and I run into an old student of mine, or I can't call him a student, he was a teacher of mine. His name is James Waitung, and he's sitting right in the front row. And out of the work that we did together, he's taking classes. One of the things that he said was that he was going to go and re-inhabit the wild rice fields, the wild rice in Rice Lake, against this tremendous piece of commercial fishing and everything else that goes down. Just literally, you're talking about 30 kilometers away. And it's not just James in terms of the wild rice he sells. It's actually the discourse that James has about what he's doing and the profundity of his idea, inspiration. So I spoke to him today. I came here with you. There's James. And he says to me, well, it's one thing for me to have gone into wild rice production and somehow managed a subsistence, a livelihood with it. Now it's the other thing is, how do I repopulate Rice Lake so it becomes Rice Lake? All right? So in terms of your teaching, it's like I said, I came full circle, you know, to this specific locality, in this region, that in fact, all those concepts have come together in a way in terms of the efforts of so many people who actually have developed cultural practices because they've actually come to realize they already had the practices in advance anyway. And I think you've just said it so marvelous. You just reminded me of how much, you know, because when we work, we study, we forget what our most basic principles are. And instead of asking a question, I just wanted to thank you for, in fact, reminding me of why, in fact, I do some of the things that I do as a professor and stuff. Thank you very much.
And thank you to the land and the wild rice and all your efforts. And thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. It's really unfortunate that we have to bring this to a close. However, there is a post-talk discussion afterwards that I think Tamina is going to inform you. But I'll turn this over to Tamina to make the official vote of thanks.
Hello. So my name is Tamana Kohi, as you guys already know, and I'm on the board of directors for the Kawartha World Issues Center. And we're just a small charitable global education center, for those of you that don't know. And I'm currently studying environmental sciences and studies. And you know, it's funny that we're just talking about getting back to our roots, and that's really the main cause of like me coming to university. And it's funny because I think a lot of us as students get so caught up in the everyday, and we forget that what the important thing is to love the earth and love where we come from and connect with people on a deeper level, because really we're all in this room because we share a love for this earth. And we're meant to be here to protect it. And Vandana, you're such a wonderful example of that. And I've been looking up to you since I was like really young in high school, and like that's what really started me on this journey of trying to pull my own load, you know. So I did have to say a couple other things though. So on behalf of the organizing committee, like the Kawartha World Issues Center, the Trent Centre for Biomaterials Research and the Carbon Conversation Series, the Indigenous Environmental Studies, and the First People's House of Learning. Many thanks again to Vandana for taking the time from your busy schedule after a heavy week of, I guess, going from place to place. What else? And I also wanted to thank you for being part of Trent's milestones. We've reached 50 years, and we're also celebrating our 25th anniversary with Quick. Right here I have a gift of a medicine bag, and there is also a Quick t-shirt in there and some Trent swag that you can rock.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I go now?
You can go. So at this time, I would also like to thank the David Shepard family, the Pacific Rubialis Energy, Wilderbordele, I was told how to pronounce that, but I kind of forgot. Sustainable Trent Oxfam, Dan Ladandan Catering, Diane Longboat, and Jody Koberinsky with the Festival of Dangerous Ideas for their generous support of Dr. Shiva's Peterborough visit today. And of course, a big thank you to the numerous volunteers. I saw you all working so hard. Thank you so much. And a special welcome to the Katimavik volunteers on tour here from the Métis Nation in Alberta. Thank you. So a couple last things. I just want to wish you a safe travel home, Vandana, and your traveling companions as well. And so you're going to be leaving immediately. And so yes, I am inviting everybody to the gathering space. There's going to be a post-lecture conversation, and there will be refreshments catered by Food Not Bombs, and there are also treats right outside of Wenjack that you can buy if you wish to do so. And also, if you didn't make a donation on your way in, it would be very generous and appreciated if you could just make a small donation there. And yeah, so thank you all for coming. This has been so lovely, and I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to say hi. Thank you.